The ships came without warning on a Tuesday morning in the year 2347. Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the lunar military base and watched the sky over Earth turn dark. Not dark like night, dark like something had swallowed the sun itself. Hundreds of vessels, each one larger than any city humanity had ever built, appeared in orbit around the planet. They moved in perfect formation, like a flock of birds that shared one mind. "What the hell are those?" whispered Lieutenant Park beside her. Elena did not answer. She had no answer to give. Within the hour, every military channel on Earth went silent. Not jammed, not destroyed, just silent. The missiles stayed in their silos. The fighter jets stayed on their runways. The soldiers stayed in their barracks. Nobody gave an order to stand down. Nobody needed to. One look at those ships, and every human being understood the same terrible truth. Whatever had come to visit them was so far beyond human power that fighting would be like an ant declaring war on the ocean. Then the visitors spoke. Their voices did not come through radio or speakers. They came directly into the mind of every human being alive, all at once, like a thought that was not your own. The voice was beautiful and terrible, warm and cold, loving and hungry all at the same time. "Children of Earth," the voice said, "we are the Voluntari. We are the Ascended Ones. We have watched you struggle in darkness for so long, but your time of suffering is over. We have come to bring you into the light." Elena felt her knees go weak. Something in that voice made her want to fall down and weep with joy. Something made her want to worship. She gripped the railing hard enough to turn her knuckles wide and forced herself to stay standing. The Voluntari descended to Earth 3 days later. They were beautiful. That was the first thing everyone noticed. They stood 8 feet tall, with skin that glowed like starlight and eyes that held the depth of galaxies. When they walked, flowers grew in their footsteps. When they spoke, the sick felt their pain fade. When they touched the dying, death itself seemed to retreat. The world fell to its knees. Elena watched the broadcasts from the lunar base. She watched the Pope bow before a Voluntari Hierophant in Vatican City. She watched the President of the United Nations kiss the feet of a being that called itself the voice of heaven. She watched billions of people weep with joy as they accepted the covenant of submission. The covenant was simple. Worship the Voluntari as gods. Build temples in their honor. Offer prayers and devotion. In return, the Ascended Ones would end all suffering. No more disease. No more hunger. No more war. Paradise on earth, given freely to those who knelt. Those who did not kneel simply vanished. It happened to Elena's commanding officer first. Admiral Chun had been a hard man, a stubborn man, a man who had spent 40 years defending humanity against threats from the void. When the order came down to decommission the fleet and convert the military bases into temples, he refused. The next morning, Elena went to his quarters to deliver a report. The quarters were empty. Not just empty of the Admiral. Empty of any sign he had ever existed. His name was gone from the duty roster. His photographs were gone from the walls. When Elena asked the other officers about him, they stared at her with blank confusion. Admiral who? They asked. Elena learned the word for it later. The Voluntari called it unbinding. They did not kill those who resisted. They simply erased them from the fabric of reality itself. No body, no memory, no proof they had ever lived at all. She learned to be careful after that. She learned to kneel when the Voluntari were watching. She learned to bow her head and mouth the words of prayer. But inside her chest, something cold and hard and stubborn refused to break. 5 years passed. Earth became a temple world. The cities were rebuilt into monuments of worship. The factories produced only offerings for the Ascended Ones. The schools taught only the holy texts of the covenant. And humanity smiled and knelt and prayed. Because the alternative was to cease to exist, Elena was transferred back to Earth after 3 years. She worked as a logistics officer in what had once been the New York Naval Yard, now the Cathedral of Eternal Dawn. Her job was to manage the supply chains that fed the endless religious festivals. It was boring work, safe work, invisible work. It was exactly where she needed to be. She had spent 5 years watching, 5 years listening, 5 years noticing things that did not make sense. The Valanthari were powerful. That was beyond question. They could cure any disease with a touch. They could make crops grow in dead soil. They could calm storms and move mountains and do 1,000 things that seemed like miracles. But they were not all powerful. Elena noticed the small things first. The way certain Valanthari avoided the old power plants that still used fusion reactors. The way they flinched just slightly when they passed too close to certain machines. The way their perfect glowing faces tightened with something that looked almost like discomfort when they visited the lunar shipyards where humanity's decommissioned warships rusted in the void. One ship in particular seemed to bother them. The UES Prometheus, the most advanced battleship humanity had ever built. Set in Lunar Dry Dock 7, the Valanthari had ordered it preserved as a monument to humanity's violent past. They held ceremonies there sometimes, to remind humans of the darkness they had left behind. But the Valanthari never went inside. Elena managed to get herself assigned to a supply run to the lunar dockyards. It took 3 months of careful maneuvering, of being helpful and invisible and forgettable. When she finally stepped aboard the Prometheus for the first time in 8 years, she felt something shift in her chest. The ship was cold and dark and silent. Dust covered every surface. But when Elena walked past the reactor core, she felt warmth. Not much, just a whisper. The backup power cells were still running, keeping the core in standby mode. Waiting for someone to wake it up, she placed her hand on the cold metal wall and made a promise. "I don't know what you are," she whispered to the ship. "I don't know why they fear you, but I'm going to find out. And when I do, I'm going to remind humanity what it feels like to stand up." Somewhere in the darkness of the ship, something hummed in response. The ember had found its spark. Now it just needed fuel. Elena found the first member of her resistance in a basement beneath the ruins of Métis. Dr. Marcus Chun had been one of the greatest quantum physicists of his generation. He had helped design the Prometheus reactor. Now he lived like a rat, hiding in forgotten tunnels and eating stolen food. Because he had made the mistake of asking questions the Valanthari did not want answered. "They tried to unbind me," Marcus told Elena, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. "I felt it, like hooks in my soul, trying to pull me apart. But something went wrong. They couldn't finish it. I woke up 3 days later in a ditch outside the city, and nobody remembered my name." Elena leaned forward. "Why couldn't they finish it?" Marcus smiled. It was not a happy smile, because I didn't believe them. Not for 1 second. Not in my heart, not in my gut, not anywhere that matters. And I think that broke something in their power. This was the first piece of the puzzle. Over the next 2 years, Elena built her network in secret. She called them the Ember because that was all they were. A tiny spark hidden in the ashes of human pride. They were scientists and soldiers, engineers and priests, teachers and criminals. The only thing they had in common was a simple truth. They had never, not even for a moment, believed that the Valanthari were gods. They met in forgotten places. Old subway tunnels. Abandoned bunkers. The basements of buildings the Valanthari had declared sacred and therefore never visited. They shared information in whispers and coded messages. And slowly, piece by piece, they began to understand what the Valanthari really were. It was Marcus who finally cracked it. "They're not gods," he said, spreading his research across a dusty table in their hidden base. They're not even close to gods. They're parasites. Elena looked at the charts and equations he had drawn. She understood maybe half of it. Explain it simply. Marcus took a deep breath. The Voluntari feed on belief, on worship, on the psychic energy that sentient minds generate when they genuinely believe they are inferior. Every prayer we offer them makes them stronger. Every time a human kneels with real faith in their heart, it's like feeding them a meal. And when they unbind someone, they're not actually erasing them from reality. They're just making everyone forget. It's a trick. A very powerful trick, but still just a trick. So their power comes from us, Elena said slowly. Their power is us. Without billions of humans feeding them belief every day, they would be nothing but tall, glowing aliens with some fancy technology. Still dangerous, but not gods. Not even close. Elena felt something cold and bright kindle in her chest. It felt like hope. What about the ships? The miracles? The way they cure diseases? Technology. Very advanced technology, yes. Things we don't understand yet. But not magic. And there's something else. Marcus pulled out a new set of papers. I've been studying the old Prometheus schematics. Do you know why the Voluntari never go near that ship? Elena shook her head. The reactor. The exotic particles it produces when it runs at full power. They interfere with the psychic field the Voluntari use to manipulate reality. Inside a certain radius of a running Prometheus-class reactor, their powers simply stop working. The room went silent. Elena looked at the papers. She looked at Marcus. She looked around at the faces of the 37 people who had risked everything to be here. You're telling me, she said carefully, that the most advanced battleship humanity ever built is also the perfect weapon against beings who call themselves gods. Marcus nodded. I'm telling you that the Voluntari mothballed the Prometheus because they were afraid of it. And I'm telling you that if we could get that ship running again, with a crew that truly doesn't believe in their divinity, we could hurt them. Really hurt them. Elena stood up. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Then we steal it back. The plan took 80 months to develop. The problem was not just getting to the ship. The problem was crew. The Prometheus needed at least 40 people to operate at minimum capacity. 40 people who could not just pretend to disbelieve, but who genuinely, in the deepest parts of their souls, knew that the Voluntari were frauds. Elena recruited carefully. She looked for people who had lost family to unbinding and carried only cold rage in their hearts. She looked for people whose faith had died when the gods arrived and demanded worship. She looked for people who had spent years faking devotion while something bitter and defiant burned inside them. She found Yuki Tanaka, a pilot whose entire family had been unbound when her younger brother refused to kneel during a ceremony. Yuki had smiled and prayed for 3 years while planning her revenge. She found Brother Thomas, who had been a Catholic priest before the Voluntari came. He had watched his God replaced by beings of flesh and light, and his faith had not broken. It had simply changed targets. He believed now only in humanity's right to stand free. She found Kofi Mensah, the lead engineer who had built the Prometheus reactor with his own hands. The Voluntari had tried to unbind him twice, but something about his absolute certainty in human engineering made their power slide off him like water off stone. One by one, Elena gathered her crew, 47 souls who had forgotten how to kneel. On the night before the mission, Elena called them together in the deepest room of their hidden base. She looked at their faces, scientists and soldiers, the young and the old, the grieving and the furious. Tomorrow we steal back our ship, she said. Some of us will die. The Voluntari will try to unbind us. They will try to make us forget who we are and what we're fighting for. But they can only touch minds that believe they are gods. And none of us believe that anymore. She raised her fist. They came to Earth and called themselves divine. They made us kneel and told us it was mercy. They erased our heroes and called it peace. Tomorrow, we remind them of something they forgot a long time ago. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Gods can bleed. And we're going to prove it. The ember burned brighter than it had in 5 long years. The transport shuttle docked at Lunar Dry Dock 7 just after midnight. Elena stepped off first, wearing the uniform of a supply technician. Behind her came 20 of her crew, dressed as maintenance workers and cargo handlers. The rest would arrive in 3 more shuttles over the next 6 hours. Moving too many people at once would draw attention. The dry dock was quiet. A skeleton crew of human workers moved through the corridors, their eyes empty with the peace of true believers. 3 voluntary sentinels stood at key intersections, their bodies glowing softly in the dim light. They did not carry weapons. They did not need weapons. Their minds were the deadliest things in any room. Elena had trained for this moment for 18 months. She had learned to make her thoughts small and quiet. She had learned to wrap her anger in layers of false calm. She had learned to walk past beings who could read minds without letting them see what burned in her heart. The first sentinel looked at her as she passed. Elena felt the touch against her consciousness. It was gentle, almost curious, like a hand brushing against a curtain. The voluntary expected to find worship there. Fear and love and a sweet submission that fed their power. Instead, they found nothing. A blank wall. A closed door. The sentinel frowned slightly but let her pass. Humans sometimes had quiet minds. It was not unusual that Elena did not let herself breathe until she was 3 corridors away. The Prometheus waited in the main docking bay, held in place by massive clamps that had not moved in 5 years. Elena looked up at it through the observation window and felt her heart squeeze. The ship was beautiful. 3 kilometers of dark metal and silent guns, built to carry humanity's fire across the stars. They had put worship flags on it. They had carved voluntary prayers into its hull. They had tried to turn a weapon into a monument, but beneath all that, the ship was still waiting. Still ready. Team 2 is in position. Yuki's voice crackled in Elena's hidden earpiece. North corridor clear. Team 3 in position, came Kofi's voice. Engineering access secured. The reactor looks good. Better than good. Someone's been maintaining it. Elena smiled grimly. The voluntary had kept the ship in working order, probably for their ceremonies. They had not realized they were keeping humanity's sword sharp. All teams move on my signal, Elena said. Remember your training. Keep your minds quiet. If you feel them pushing, think of something that makes you angry. Something that reminds you why we're here. Don't let them find your faith, because we don't have any. She waited until the night shift changed and the corridors emptied. Then she gave the signal. 47 people moved through the dry dock, like ghosts. The first 3 minutes went perfectly. Teams secured the access hatches. Engineers moved toward the reactor core. Pilots headed for the bridge. Elena herself led a team toward the central command systems, where she would unlock the docking clamps and wake the ship from its long sleep. Then everything went wrong. A young woman named Sarah, barely 20 years old, walked past a voluntary sentinel at the wrong moment. The being reached out casually to touch her thoughts, as it had done 1,000 times before. But Sarah had lost her parents to unbinding just 3 months ago. Her grief was still fresh. Her rage was still raw. And when the voluntary touched her mind, it found not quiet emptiness, but a howling storm of fury and hate. The sentinel recoiled. Its perfect face twisted with shock. And then it opened its mouth and screamed in a language that was not sound but pure psychic force. Every Valanthari on the station heard it. Every human with any sensitivity felt it like a knife in their skull. Sarah simply ceased to exist. One moment she was there, running for cover, reaching for the weapon at her side. The next moment she was gone. Not dead, not fallen, just erased, as if she had never been born at all. Elena felt the loss like a punch to the gut. She had recruited Sarah personally. She had promised to keep her safe. She did not have time to grieve. All teams, weapons free. She shouted into her com. Move fast. They know we're here. The dry dock exploded into chaos. Valanthari sentinels came from every direction, their bodies blazing with power. They reached out with their minds, trying to crush human thoughts into submission. 2 more of Elena's crew vanished in the first 30 seconds, but the others held. They had trained too hard and hated too long. They fired their weapons, and for the first time in 5 years, Valanthari blood stained the metal floors. Elena reached the command center with 4 of her team. She shot the lock off the door and dove inside, her fingers flying across the ancient human controls. Kofi, I need that reactor online now. 30 seconds. Kofi's voice was strained. She could hear gunfire in the background. They're trying to get in. We've lost 2 more. Elena's hands shook as she worked the controls. The docking clamps were frozen. 5 years of disuse had welded them in place. She rerouted power, bypassed safety systems, did everything she had learned in 20 years of naval service. The clamps groaned. They shifted. They began to open. Reactor online. Kofi shouted. Elena felt it immediately. A wave of warmth spread through the ship as the reactor core roared to life. And with it came something else. A field of energy that pushed outward from the Prometheus like a silent explosion. The Valanthari sentinels stopped screaming. Elena looked through the command center window and saw something she would remember for the rest of her life. 3 Valanthari stood in the corridor outside, their hands raised to destroy her. But the moment the reactor field touched them, their glow flickered and died. Their perfect faces twisted with pain. Their bodies began to tremble. They looked, for the first time, afraid. Get to the ship. Elena broadcast to all channels. Everyone get to the ship now. The field protects us. The survivors ran. 23 of them made it aboard. 23 out of 40-7. Elena sealed the hatches and sprinted for the bridge. Behind her, she could hear Valanthari reinforcements arriving, their screams of rage echoing through the dry dock. But they could not get close. Every time they approached the Prometheus, the reactor field pushed them back. UK, I was already in the pilot's seat when Elena arrived. Her face was pale, but her hands were steady. Ready to fly, Captain. Elena took her place in the command chair. Through the viewport, she could see more Valanthari ships approaching. Hundreds of them, filling the space around the moon. Then let's show them what humanity can do. The Prometheus tore free from the dry dock in a blaze of engine fire. Valanthari pursuit craft swooped in from every direction, their weapons charging with terrible light. The first shot splashed harmlessly against the Prometheus shields. The second volley came closer, but still did not penetrate. And then the Prometheus fired back. Human weapons. Human engineering. Human rage made solid and thrown across the void. The lead pursuit craft exploded. Elena opened a broadcast channel. Every frequency. Every world. Every human being who could receive a signal. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the U.S. Prometheus. We have stolen back our ship. We have proven that the Valanthari can be hurt. They can be killed. They are not gods. They are parasites who feed on your belief. Stop kneeling. Stop praying. Stop giving them your power. She looked at the stars ahead, vast and cold and free. We are coming, and we will teach them what happens when humanity remembers how to fight. The Prometheus burned toward the darkness between the stars, carrying the last ember of human defiance into the void. 80 months after the theft of the Prometheus, the galaxy knew Elena Vasquez's name. She had become a ghost and a legend. The Voluntari called her the Great Heretic. The humans who still believed called her a demon. But on 17 colony worlds, in hidden corners and whispered conversations, they called her something else. Hope. The Prometheus moved through space like a shadow, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. Elena had learned the rules of this new war. She could not fight the Voluntari directly. They were still too powerful, still too many. But she could do something worse. She could make people doubt. The first colony she liberated was New Singapore, a mining world on the edge of human space. The Voluntari had built a massive temple there, and every month they held a ceremony where thousands of workers gathered to pray and offer their devotion. Elena arrived during the ceremony. The Prometheus descended from the sky like a fallen star, its reactor field pushing outward in a wave of invisible force. The Voluntari priests on the stage suddenly stopped glowing, their beautiful faces twisted with pain. Their voices, which had been echoing in the minds of every human present, fell silent. And then Elena broadcast her message. "Look at them," she said, her voice carrying across the plaza. "Look at your gods. They are not divine. They are just aliens with technology we don't understand yet. They feed on your belief. Every time you kneel, you make them stronger. Every time you pray, you give them power over you." The Voluntari tried to unbind her. She felt the hooks reaching for her soul, trying to tear her out of existence. But the reactor field protected her. Their power slid off like rain off glass. "Stop feeding them," Elena said. "Stand up. Remember what you are." Not everyone listened. Some fell to their knees and prayed harder, convinced this was a test of faith. But others looked at the trembling, frightened beings on the stage, and something shifted behind their eyes. Doubt is a seed. Once planted, it grows. Elena moved from colony to colony. She could not stay long enough to truly liberate anyone. The Voluntari would send reinforcements within hours of her arrival. But she did not need to stay. She only needed to plant that seed. Her crew grew. Survivors from each colony joined her, people whose faith had cracked and broken when they saw their gods bleed. Kofi trained new engineers. Yuki trained new pilots. And Elena trained them all to guard their minds. "Belief is a weapon," she told every new recruit. "The Voluntari use it against us. But we can use it too. If you truly, honestly, completely stop believing they are gods, they cannot touch you. Their power comes from faith. Starve them of faith, and they starve." The war grew larger. Other ships began to appear. Human engineers, inspired by the broadcasts Elena sent after every raid, started building their own reactor cores. They were crude at first, barely functional, dangerous to their own crews. But they worked. Each one created a small bubble of space where Voluntari power failed. The Ascended ones had never faced an enemy like this. For 50,000 years, they had conquered through awe and worship. Species after species had knelt before them, overwhelmed by their beauty and their miracles. The idea of a species that refused to believe had never occurred to them. They adapted slowly, clumsily. They began using human converts as shields. When the Prometheus approached a colony, the Voluntari would put true believers in the line of fire, knowing Elena would not kill her own people. She lost 3 good officers learning to work around this tactic. They began unbinding entire populations as punishment. After Elena liberated a colony on Mars, the Voluntari erased 10,000 people from existence. Not resistors, just random workers, chosen to make a point. The message was clear. Every human Elena saved would cost 100 more. Elena did not stop. She could not stop. The alternative was surrender. And surrender meant the slow death of everything that made humanity human. But the war was taking its toll. YUK. I had become her right hand, leading strike teams to rescue prisoners and assassinate voluntary leaders. The crew called her the God Killer. She never smiled anymore. She had killed so many and lost so many that something in her had turned to ice. Elena worried about her, but needed her too much to let her rest. Brother Thomas held services in the Prometheus chapel, but his prayers were different now. He did not ask for divine help. He asked for human strength. He reminded the crew that they were fighting not just for their lives, but for the right to be something other than livestock for beings that called themselves gods. Kofi worked 20-hour days keeping the reactor running. The voluntary had started using weapons specifically designed to disrupt the reactor field. Each battle damaged the core a little more. Each repair took a little longer, and then the reinforcements came. Elena was in her quarters when the intelligence arrived. A spy on one of the colony worlds had intercepted a voluntary communication and sent it through the underground network. The message was simple. The voluntary had called for help. They were not alone in the universe. The voluntary were just one species in a vast empire called the Celestial Dominion. For 50,000 years, this dominion had ruled through faith and fear, conquering species after species, feeding on their worship. 100 worlds knelt to them. 1,000 species paid tribute in belief. And now they were sending a judgment fleet to deal with humanity once and for all. 300 warships. A mobile fortress the size of a small moon called the Eternity's Throne. And aboard that fortress, the God Emperor himself, a being so bloated with accumulated worship that he could unmake stars with a thought. Elena called her officers together and told them what was coming. The room went silent. "We can't win," Yuki said finally. Her voice was flat, empty. 300 ships. We have 37, and most of them can barely fly. We can't win by fighting alone, Elena agreed. But we've never been alone. We've spent 80 months planting seeds. On Earth, on the colonies. In the hearts of every human who watched their gods bleed and started to wonder. She pulled up a map of the Sol system. The Judgment Fleet is coming to Earth. They're coming to make an example. To crush humanity so completely that no species in the Dominion ever thinks of resisting again. Elena looked at her officers. She saw exhaustion and fear. But she also saw something harder, something that had been forged in the fire of 18 months of impossible war. They're expecting to find a species on its knees. A species broken and faithful and ready to die. They're expecting to face a few rebels with outdated ships and desperate hope. She smiled, and there was no warmth in it. Only promise. They're going to find something else. I've sent messages to every colony, every resistance cell, every human who ever heard our broadcasts and felt their faith die. When the Judgment Fleet arrives at Earth, we're not going to face them alone. How many ships? Kofi asked. As many as humanity can build. As many as we can crew with people who have stopped believing in gods. Elena stood up. We have 6 months. Let's make them count. The Prometheus turned toward Earth, carrying with it the last and greatest hope of a species that refused to kneel. The Judgment Fleet arrived at Earth on a cold morning in December. Elena stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and watched 300 voluntary warships pour out of faster than light, space like a river of burning stars. Behind them came the Eternity's Throne, a vessel so large it blocked out the sun itself. Its surface was covered in temples and spires, each one carved with prayers in languages older than human civilization. Aboard that massive ship sat the God Emperor of the Celestial Dominion. 50,000 years of accumulated worship had made him something beyond mortal understanding. He did not speak. He did not need to speak. His will echoed across the void like thunder. Children of Earth, his voice boomed in every human mind. Your rebellion ends today. Kneel and accept the mercy of the Ascended. Resist and be unmade. There will be no third choice. There will be no escape. Elena felt the pressure of his will against her consciousness. It was immense, crushing, like standing at the bottom of an ocean of faith. Even with her training, even with her certainty, she felt her knees begin to buckle. Then she thought of Admiral Chun, erased from existence for refusing to bow. She thought of Sarah, unmade in the dry dock because her grief was too loud. She thought of the 10,000 innocents killed on Mars to punish her for daring to fight. Her knees straightened. Her back stiffened. Her voice came out steady and cold. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the U.E.'s Prometheus. I have a counter-offer. She opened a broadcast channel, not just to the Judgment Fleet, to every human being across every colony world. To Earth itself, where billions still knelt in temples and prayed to beings that fed on their devotion. 18 months ago, I told you the Velanthari were not gods. I told you they could bleed. Tonight, I am going to prove they can die. But I cannot do this alone. I need you to remember something you have been trained to forget. She took a breath. You have never needed gods. You have only ever needed each other. Every time you kneel, you feed them. Every time you pray, you make them stronger. But every time you stand up, every time you remember that you are human and that is enough, you take that power back. Elena looked at the massive fleet arrayed against her. 300 ships against one. So stand up. Not for me. For yourselves. For your children. For every human who ever looked at the stars and dreamed of reaching them without falling to their knees. Stand up and stop believing. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, across the solar system, something shifted. On Earth. A factory worker in what had been Beijing put down his prayer beads and stood up straight for the first time in 7 years. In a temple in the ruins of Paris, a priestess looked at the glowing altar and felt her faith crack like thin ice. On a mining colony near Jupiter, 300 workers walked out of the morning worship service and did not come back. One by one, billion by billion, humanity remembered how to stand. The God Emperor felt it immediately. A hemorrhage in the psychic field he had fed on for millennia. A crack in the foundation of his power. For the first time in 10,000 years, he felt something he did not recognize. And then the rest of humanity's fleet emerged from hiding. They came from behind the moon, from the asteroid belt, from hidden dockyards on every colony world. 300 ships, crewed by engineers and scientists and soldiers who had spent 6 months building them in secret. Each one carried a reactor core based on the Prometheus design. Each one was crewed by people who had stopped believing in gods. The God Emperor stared at the human fleet with something that might have been disbelief. You cannot win, he broadcast. We have ruled for 50,000 years. We have consumed species beyond counting. You are nothing, Elena smiled. We're humanity, and you made a mistake. You spent 5 years teaching us to hate you. The battle began. Human ships dove into the Velanthari formation, their reactor fields overlapping to create massive zones where divine power failed. Velanthari warships fired weapons that could shatter moons, but the human ships were fast and fearless, and crewed by people who had nothing left to lose. The Velanthari fought back with terrible fury. Ships died by the dozens on both sides. The void filled with fire and debris, and the screams of the dying. But the humans kept coming. Elena drove the Prometheus through the heart of the enemy fleet. Around her, Yuki piloted with cold precision. Kofi coaxed impossible power from the damaged reactor. Brother Thomas moved through the ship, holding the hands of the dying and reminding them what they were fighting for. "All power to forward shields," Elena ordered. "Take us straight at the throne." "That's suicide," Yuki said. "That's the plan." The Prometheus burned toward the Eternity's throne like a spear thrown at the heart of heaven. Enemy fire tore through its hull. Crew members died at their stations. Entire sections of the ship went dark and cold. But the reactor kept running, and the ship kept flying. The God Emperor tried to unmake them. He gathered 50,000 years of accumulated power and hurled it at the approaching vessel like a fist of pure will. The attack should have erased the Prometheus from existence, should have scattered its atoms across the void. Instead, the reactor field caught it, absorbed it, turned divine wrath into nothing more than light and noise. Elena watched the God Emperor's face through the viewscreen as the Prometheus closed the final distance. She saw the disbelief there, the confusion, the fear. He had never faced an enemy that did not believe in him. He had forgotten that such a thing was possible. "You are not a god," Elena said softly. "You are just old. And your time is over." She gave the order to fire. The Prometheus emptied every weapon it had into the Eternity's throne. Missiles and railgun rounds and energy beams. Everything humanity had built to fight the darkness between the stars. The massive vessel's shields flickered and died. Its hull cracked. Its temples crumbled, and the God Emperor, bloated with stolen power, consumed by worship he could no longer access, felt something he had not experienced in 50,000 years. He felt mortal. The Eternity's throne exploded. The blast vaporized 30 Valanthari ships and sent the rest spinning into chaos. Across the battlefield, the surviving human crews watched the sky light up with the death of a god, and across 1,000 worlds, the celestial dominion felt its foundations crack. The Prometheus did not survive. The explosion caught the ship before it could escape. Elena felt the deck lurch beneath her feet. She saw Yuki thrown from her chair, saw Kofi disappear beneath a collapsing bulkhead. The bridge filled with fire and smoke and the screaming of dying metal. Her last act was to grab the broadcast controls. "We did it," she said, her voice carrying to every human being alive. "We killed a god. Remember this. Remember what we are. Never kneel again." The Prometheus fell toward Earth, burning, broken, finally at peace. It crashed into the ocean off the coast of Greece, sinking into the waters where humans had once told stories of titans and heroes and mortals who challenged the divine. Elena Vasquez died with her hand still on the controls, and a smile on her face, but humanity survived. The celestial dominion fractured. Without the God Emperor, the Valanthari lost their hold on 100 worlds. Species that had knelt for millennia began to rise. The great empire of faith crumbled into 1,000 pieces. On Earth, the temples were torn down. The prayer flags were burned. Humans looked up at the stars, not with worship, but with wonder, knowing that the void belonged to those with courage enough to claim it. They built new ships and named them after their fallen. They carried Elena's message to every corner of the galaxy, a simple truth that echoed across the void. Never again would humanity kneel. Never again would they forget what they were. They were not children of gods. They were the species that had buried them, and the universe would remember that forever.